Hello everyone, dear friends. Our story continues with the fact that the main character, named Frog, was immediately surrounded by three monsters, which are several times higher than himself, and who have not yet decided what to do with him, destroy or leave alone. And then, in the hand of one of them, a lightning bolt quickly appears, which, apparently, was intended for our hero, because they sent it at full speed right at him. Seeing the whole situation, Frog was seriously scared and he urgently needed to take some measures, in order to at least stay alive. Immediately, without time to think, he tried to duck, in order to at least soften the force of the blow, that was flying straight at him. And the lightning, by the way, was so strong, that it could be seen and heard, from every corner of the forest. Due to the fact that Frog was able to dodge a little, it only touched the top of his head, although it took 14% of his health from him, which greatly affected his well-being, because he really experienced stress now, and his whole body was covered with cold sweat. He realized that this was a planned magic attack, and he actually met an advanced opponent, who might also need to complete the task. At that moment, the trees continued to whistle and break from the blows. From this, he jumped and realized that the only correct decision that he could now make was to simply run away, since he still had no chance of winning this confrontation. And he decides to use his power mushroom Ting Ting to the maximum, but this time, not for an attack, but in order to quickly hide and run away. His rivals continued to look at the situation and wondered how a monster of such a small level, yet crazy, really plans to run away. Therefore, they sent one of their company to catch him and solve this issue. And now, our Frog will now be attacked by another monster, who asks his teammates to calm down and not worry. His main idea is to practice on Frog his new skills that he has just learned. From this idea, he simply cannot hide his laughter. He hits the ground with an axe, and it immediately begins to burst at the seams. And in front of the mushroom, which was flying so fast, a huge stone wall suddenly appears, into which it hits at full speed and also loses -10 health points. At this moment, a sign pops up for him, which informs him that his health level is critically low, less than 50%, and he should be more careful and replenish it urgently. The blow against the wall was so strong, that it spun and rang. But time was critically short, and just at that moment, for the final touch, an archer joins in, who wants to hit and destroy the mushroom with her arrow. She lets go of her hand and an arrow flies at great speed, which pierces our hero completely, and demolishes another 23% of his health. What's what, and he absolutely could not expect this, because he did nothing bad to them. And it was absolutely incomprehensible why he was punished. All he had to do was just save the world. At great speed, he again hits the stone wall and breaks through it completely, then bounces back a few meters. The system comes back into play and tells him that it's game over for him while he's still bouncing off the ground at high speed. And so, he finally stops and lies on the floor, and smoke begins to come out of his body, due to the huge friction that has formed. But who knows, maybe it's even his soul. At this time, the braves approach him and begin to discuss the current situation. One praises the archer for her accurate hit and invites her to compete in the future. And she promises to think about if she will be really invited. Their entire conversation is stopped by the magician, who at the very beginning launched a lightning projectile at our hero. He suggests that everyone together take the reward for the destruction of the fungus and move on. Here, a system appears in front of Frog again, which begins to scold him for calling himself a master of the game and gives him the opportunity to use Resurrection Coin, but only once. To which Frog, lying on the ground, manages to answer and reproach the system for asking him very, very stupid questions, because, of course, he agrees. And then a miracle begins. The entire area around which Frog was located abruptly begins to glow, with a bright white flash, and a window of achievements opens for him, in which he is congratulated on the discovery of a new skill that he can use in battle. At this time, he had already fully recovered, and the scars and bumps on his body simply disappeared. Literally a second of time passes and then, an explosion, during which the entire space was filled with the ejection of spores, and absolutely nothing was visible. At that moment, the heroes were at a loss. They began to cough and the most important of them was very surprised that mushroom monsters also use skills, because he had never encountered this before. And since Frog didn't have time at all, he needed to escape as quickly as possible. Therefore, while a smoke screen hangs over him and nothing is visible, he decides to use his mushroom ting ting one more time, in order to escape from this place and be saved. Unfortunately, he did not manage to do this without a trace, and the archer noticed him and began to shout loudly, so that the others would also hurry up and catch him. The entire brave team began to run after him, and the only way to continue the game and survive for the frog was to successfully escape. He flew, although he saw that he had 3 opponents on his tail again. Adrenaline went through the roof, which is why he bravely tried to jump with all his might, despite the fact that he is a simple mushroom, which used to be so difficult to move around. During the flight, he asks the system how much time he has left before the mission ends. To which the system answers him that there are still 3 minutes and 21 seconds left to live. Scrolling through this data in his head, Frog realizes that in just 3 minutes he will be able to complete this task and receive his reward for survival, namely, hardening and limbs. Thanks to each of these rewards, his ability to survive will only increase several times over. And then, again, lightning, and the sky, covered with dark clouds, which had never been before. Apparently, his rivals were very angry. Lightning struck right next to him, to which Frog asked only one question: did they have come? He abruptly continued to run and could not understand how they could find him so quickly, because he covered the entire area that was near them with smoke. And then a mark sign appears above his head, which points directly at him, from which Frog absolutely does not understand what is happening after all. It turns out that they pointed a prey tracker at him, which hunters usually use, in order to mark the prey and catch it easier. The archer comes closer and begins to talk to him that she did not even know that the mushroom could come to life again, but now it will become a simple prey for them, since the mark has already been placed. The same opponent who had attacked Frog for the first time again rushed into battle, laughing and shouting that the end would really come to him. He was furious, and for some reason everything around him shone with a terrible, red light. Frog tried to jump away, but, unfortunately, the shock wave caught up with him faster and he fell again and began to bounce off the ground, after which, at great speed, he hit a tree. He understands that he has already used the only coin that allowed him to resurrect, so he no longer has the right to be defeated, and this is his last chance. He is still pressed against the tree, and tears began to well up in his eyes, because the blows and opponents were approaching him, closer and closer. Almost immediately, they continued their attack and used the magic combo cut, which cut the tree into pieces, and also touched the mushroom a little, which made him cry, and he again lost -18% health. He immediately became angry and decided that he would not die this way one more time. With the last of his strength, he once again used spore eruption and made a smoke curtain around his offenders, who could not see anything beyond their hands, but continued to laugh that this trick would no longer work. The archer took out her arrow and said that with the help of her mark, she could shoot even if her eyes were closed, after which she immediately began to do so. An arrow flies from her hands, breaks through absolutely all the trees that stood in the way along the way, and with phenomenal accuracy again hits our hero and pierces him through. From what was happening, everything around him turned red again, his body was very badly injured, his parts scattered throughout the forest. And he again fell to the ground, since he no longer had strength and nothing remained. Then the system kicked in and told him that he was down to the last percentage of his health, and was on the verge of finishing the game one more time, only this time for good. While he was lying exhausted, the steps of opponents were quickly approaching him, who wanted to finish what they had already begun, and take away their awards from him. But then suddenly, a timer appears near Frog, with a countdown, 5, 4. While all this is happening, his rivals continue to praise him and say that he is really special, because he knows how not only to use skills, but also to survive and hide. Their leader agrees with this and decides that it is still better to finish the job and eliminate their rival, although at the same time, the countdown continues and is already at the number 2. The magician begins to charge a small magic ball in his hand to finish off the helpless mushroom, when suddenly the number 1 appears and again the system comes to Frog, which reports that the time is up and the mission has been successfully completed. At this moment, the birds begin to sing and fly again, and his opponents again begin to dialogue with each other, where they remember that they have not been in the village for a long time and refuse to believe that this is happening. One of them does not understand what happened and tries to find out what they are talking about. Suddenly, a giant teleporter opens in the sky, causing the opponents to panic, and the main of them shouts, and urgently orders, to retreat immediately. Suddenly, the teleporter begins to absorb mushrooms, but not one, but hundreds of mushrooms exactly the same as our frog, which are still not entirely clear where they are flying, but the only message they leave is it is time for the monster tide. Looks like something very serious is coming. Subscribe and like. The story of the brave mushroom, named Frog, continues, because he successfully completed the first part of his mission, and now, he and hundreds of exactly the same mushrooms, are sent by teleport to a new world, as something very serious is approaching. Despite the fact that the main opponent of Frog, who wanted to destroy him, ordered a retreat, someone clearly did not agree with this. That is why, one of them, with a sword in his hands, ran to destroy absolutely everything in his path, destroying one mushroom after another, until they had time to finally teleport. After all, he could not miss such an easy opportunity to gain experience points. That is why the enemy with an axe used all his skills and abilities to destroy as many mushrooms as possible in the shortest possible time. There was joy and satisfaction on his face, because he had just risen in his own eyes, due to defenseless mushrooms. In response to this, the head magician, who was the leader of the company and ordered the retreat, began to scold his ward for being a complete idiot who does not know anything about the monsters of Rookie Village, from which they had already left. But he does not listen to him at all and insists that he should not be so self-confident, because no one condemns him for being an idiot. And he continues to embarrass and insult the leader, declaring that he can go on his own if he already wants so badly. The archer keeps up the conversation and asks the leader to leave him alone, as the village has barrier protection and he will be fine. In response to this, the magician simply made a haze and left. The archer ran after him, leaving her self-confident partner, who had so much fun, but at the same time, asked not to condemn them if he suddenly died. Seeing this situation, he simply could not believe that they were so stupid, because what could happen to him if he just continued to destroy and gain experience while his teammates were just standing in front of him. Suddenly, the teleporter suddenly begins to glow with a bright white light, from which two more new mushrooms fly out. The face of the daredevil changed dramatically, and his whole body was covered with cold sweat, because he did not understand what was happening. Is it really a bunch of mushroom monsters? He began to tremble with fear. As soon as he raised his head to look up, he saw something very unusual, namely, a mustache and a beautiful smile. Suddenly, the teleport closes and a huge mushroom jumps out of it, the leader of mushroom monsters, who sends his troops to the village every 7 days. Rumor has it that he is looking for the secret of the lost mushroom. Seeing the mushroom, the enemy was very frightened and even let go of his weapon, begging for at least someone to help him. Without hesitation, the king immediately jumped on him with all his weight and called the mushrooms closer to him. From such actions, the enemy was instantly destroyed and went back to Rookie Village. Now all his experience gained over the past few days will be lost. While his former teammates ran away, the magician began to talk about what an idiot he was, but the archer stopped him and advised him to start thinking that if the boss could catch up with them, he would do exactly the same with them. The king of mushrooms found our frog in the forest, who lay exhausted and marveled at the mighty power of his savior, because he continued to believe and hope that he was here just to save him. At that moment, the king took out his sword and swung it with all his strength, ordering his mushrooms to move in the direction where the frog lay. After that, all the mushrooms began to jump sharply, according to the issued order. And so, the whole team of mushrooms ran past ours and absolutely no one wanted to help him, while he was ignored and continued to lie on the floor, having a wound in his body from an arrow that had gone through him even earlier. But he did not lose hope and asked them not to leave, because he is exactly the same mushroom that needs help. But only a pig appeared near him. Once again he asked for help, with the last of his strength, and closed his eyes. In the meantime, he fell asleep and woke up only because someone had sprayed a fire on the street. The heat that he emitted warmed the body of our mushroom very much. That is why, although not the first time, he woke up and abruptly opened his eyes. "I'm alive, what kind of place is this?" Frog said and abruptly tried to get up. Watching what is happening, he sees a lot of mushrooms, which, apparently, have already been destroyed. From the information he sees, he becomes uncomfortable. He turned his head and saw a pig, exactly the same as the one in front of him, at the moment, when he closed his eyes and begged at least someone to come to the rescue. There are the remains of mushrooms, and a pig everywhere, just don't tell me from this." He was very scared, and cold sweat and fear appeared on his face. At this moment, the pig was eating up the already destroyed mushroom, which, apparently, was destroyed by just the same enemy, the king of mushrooms eliminated. At that moment, the pig suddenly turned around, and its eyes became very, very red, like it was not ready to see Frog right now. When he saw this, he clenched his teeth tightly, and the pig at that moment continued to eat the remains of another mushroom. Seeing this picture, our hero realized that, most likely, this pig would eat him if he stays here. That is why it is very important to have time to escape, while the pig is still eating, because then she will not be up to him. He tried to move, but screamed sharply. He began to worry very much about the lower part of his body. It turns out that she ate it. And Frog was simply shocked, because how will he exist without the lower part of his body? How can he move now? At this moment, the pig begins to approach him, wagging his tail. Is she coming here? What now to be? Our hero begins to think about what to do. Perhaps it is worth pretending to be dead, since the pig should not understand that he is still alive. At this moment, she became closer and closer to our hero. That is why he closed his one eye and began to worry that she was approaching. With the last of his strength, he closed his eyes, in a panic at the approaching pig, who starts grunting and stares at him with demonically red eyes that instill fear in the eyes of those who look at them. At that moment, she began to sharply grunt and scream at him. In response to this, Frog closed his eyes with the last of his strength and tried not to open his eyes and also, not to make any sound in order not to be detected. At this point, the pig continued to throw out the remains of the mushrooms from its mouth, which is what a pig is supposed to do. It turns out that what she just threw away is just the same, the lower part of the body of our protagonist, which he was actively trying to find a minute earlier. But why did she throw it away? What's wrong with that? Even Frog himself began to think about it, because, perhaps it was a medical pig, because after she began to chew and spit out the remains of other mushrooms, he began to regenerate. All this is easily explained by the fact that after she threw the remains of his body into him, he began to restore his health. And after the pig had done all that, it just kept on walking as if nothing had happened. No, she came back and started pushing our Frog to get well soon, because she began to radiate her love for him. It turns out that it was a very kind pig, which had very good intentions. She wanted to help Frog survive, and it was she who saved him at the moment when he needed it most. All this time, while he was lying unconscious, the pig lay next to him, looking and kissing our mushroom, so that he would quickly recover and return to his previous state. She even continued to sleep with him in order to control everything and not miss anything. At this moment, the first rays of light begin to seep into the cave where they were, which first of all begin to wake up our pig. She rises and is very surprised. Panic begins to cover her, because, looking around, she cannot now find Frog, who so badly needed help. She continued to look around the area, and look around, but still, in the whole cave, she could not find our main character, whom she so badly wanted to save. That is why she immediately began to growl and, discouraged, she became very upset because she had lost her friend. That is why, without wasting a second, she ran along the entire cave in order to try to find our main character and help him, since he had already become her best friend, with whom she did not want to say goodbye. Perhaps her intentions were much, much darker than we think, so we can only guess. After all, absolutely no one can say what is in the mind of a pig. But, before running away, she put out the fire with her hind legs. It turned out that it was at the moment when the dead night came, Frog really was able to escape. Without wasting a minute, not knowing the exact intentions of that pig, he decided to run away, because he really has a very important mission that he must complete. He understands that such a chance should not be missed and, he needs to run and run again, because if he dies, it will only be at the hands of the boss, because being eaten by a pig will be just a shame for him. That is why, because of all his strength, he is trying to escape, but what is it? Is it really an earthquake? Frog refuses to believe it and asks that his thoughts still not be confirmed. But unfortunately, all this is true, and a huge fat pig is really running after him, which chewed and spit out the lower part of his body into him. Perhaps, she really loves him and just wants to help, but he cannot know this. Just the same, now we will check it. In a panic, Frog asks her to back off and get behind him, but she is getting closer and closer. Frog realizes that the pig is indeed much faster than him. He no longer had the strength to run, and his body was covered with sweat, as he fled with all his strength, just not to get caught in the pig's teeth. And then Frog recalls that he also has superpowers, or in simple words, skills. He uses his skill to completely smoke the entire area so that the pig cannot find him. The poor pig was frightened and really did not understand what was happening after all. But, when she saw this picture, and everything that happened in the cave, she was simply surprised. Her eyes began to shine, she was extremely happy and radiated only positive energy. She grunted sharply, and, it seems, nevertheless, she decided to fight, although at first glance, she seemed to be a completely tame and kind pig. She just took and inhaled absolutely all the contents that Frog used to make a smoke screen. And now, literally 10 seconds later, everything that Frog created was completely in a pig, and only the name remained from the smoke screen. At that moment, the pig saw the frog, and her eyes began to shine with stars again, a smile immediately appeared on her face, and her mouth was wide open, from which saliva flowed. It looked like she really wanted to eat it. When Frog saw this picture, he was seriously surprised and continued to sweat because he really needed to run away from the pig. And you can't understand in any way whether the pig wants to do him good, or wants to eat him, because the frog is just trying to run away, and behind him, the pig rushes, with such kind eyes, at first glance. But Frog does not know what to do, he is very scared, that is why he asks for help from the system to help him. Fortunately, she really answers him very quickly and Frog asks her if he completed the task, looking for confirmation in his words. The system agrees with him and asks if Frog wants to receive a reward for the task right now. Well, since he has no time, he agrees and asks to get a reward as soon as possible in order to escape. The system offers him a choice of 2 rewards, either it will be a hardening, or it will be limbs. After analyzing both sentences, Frog thought that the hardening sounded pretty good, but what about the limbs? Thanks to them, he would be able to safely escape and also, to resist some monsters. That is why, without thinking twice, since, after all, he has a huge pig behind him, which either loves him or wants to eat him, he chooses limbs as a reward. And very quickly begins to transform. Frog's body is already becoming similar to a human. Well, since he still, at least somehow, looks like a man, he remembers that he has a fist. That is why he takes and beats with all his strength the pig that pursued him. The blow turned out to be really very good, and thanks to the fact that they also gave him legs, he was able to start running away many times faster, which of course is really very good. It was these thoughts that our protagonist had, this was his plan to save him from such a situation. Having finally analyzed his choice, Frog nevertheless decided that now it's really better to get arms and legs. Since his combat skills and movement would become more effective for him now. The system clarified whether Frog was determined and he, without a doubt, immediately chose the limbs, after which, his transformation immediately took place. His eyes immediately began to shine, he jumped, and slowly but surely, limbs began to appear from his body, arms and legs. Everything began to happen exactly as he imagined it, only there was a small nuance, his arms and legs were not the same size as human ones. They were just arms and legs that matched the size of the mushroom, there were no phenomenal shapes. But at first this did not upset our main character at all, the only thing he said after he received it was that now it's time to really bring down. His eyes lit up and he ran as fast as he could, thinking that he was now very, very fast. But all this went on at most, for about 2 seconds, because after all this, he looked at the ground, and at how he was moving, because all this time, he really, almost stood still and barely moved. The prize he received so far has not helped him in any way, and in 30 seconds of time, he ran 2 meters at most. The only question he asked after he realized that he could not move normally, is that, are these 4 stumps really called limbs? And while he was analyzing all this, and looking to see if it helped him or not, he remembered that a huge fat pig was breathing down his back, with red eyes, which it was not clear what he wanted to do with him, either eat or help. From such an unexpected award, Frog again begins to get angry at the system for giving him something bad and absolutely unnecessary again. At this moment, the pig is getting closer and closer, and starts the jump. She jumped up and, with her kind eyes, jumped on our main character who so wanted to escape from her. Immediately she grabbed it and turned it over with her several times. After that, the pig stopped and started hugging him. She was really very pleased, and began to lick him, after which, Frog asked her to leave herself alone and let her rest a little, since he couldn't get rid of her. She continued to lick and stroke him, after which, Frog was able to think of it and used his skill, namely identification. He looked at the pig, and realized that she was very kind, but when she gets angry, she becomes very aggressive. It turns out that she was also level 10, which surprised the frog very much. That is why he asked the system to open information about himself again, and it turned out that he already had level 6, since he was still able to complete the mission and get enough experience to get promoted. It turned out that he had already improved identification, but still, the gap between him and the pig is too big in levels. I wonder if he can even escape from her embrace, because the difference is still big. Especially if you remember what happened a little earlier, when 3 opponents who were at a level above him almost destroyed him twice. At that moment, the pig became very alert. She looked at the end of the tunnel, and saw something there. She began to grunt. And suddenly, in her eyes one could see a strong fright. It looks like something very terrible is coming. It turned out that the pig just started running in circles and grunting towards our hero. Frog, of course, was so perplexed. He asked the pigs what she was doing. If she was not going to eat it, then he could just go on. Suddenly, something terrible happened. The earth began to spin underfoot, and stones also began to fall from the upper section of the cave. Both Frog and the pig were very scared, since an earthquake did happen. Meanwhile, on the street we see fog and it looks like it's not an earthquake, but a whole volcanic eruption. Although, so it's so possibly wrong, as the stones started to break off and fly to one place. Seeing this picture, Frog was frightened, and began to run away with all his might, although he would not mind if he was also picked up by a pig that ran as soon as danger arose, leaving the mushroom to its fate. He decided to ask her for help, to which she was only delighted, and immediately turned around to pick him up. With all her might, she ran towards him, despite the fact that the debris fell right next to her. She successfully ran around them and finally approached Frog. And, the only thing she did was grunt and with all her might, threw Frog onto her back with her nose. From which he, to put it mildly, was shocked and delighted at the same time, because he had never had to deal with this before. Immediately after he sat down, the pig began to run at great speed, from which Frog even rolled his eyes. But there was absolutely no time. It was necessary to be in time before the cave was completely filled with stones. The jump and, fortunately, Frog and his new hero successfully jump out in the last seconds, as immediately after, the cave is completely pelted with rocks. If they did not have time, most likely they would have remained there until the end of their lives. From this turn of events, Frog already lost consciousness, when suddenly, the story continued to develop. It turned out that 5 monsters began to look at them from the cliff. After they got closer, it became clear that these were also pigs, which differ from ours. Frog was also surprised and asked his girlfriend if they were her friends. Then I opened the statistics and realized that these are wild boars that live in packs and try to drive away weaker monsters. Suddenly, the wild boars lowered their heads in front of the leader who had a fire built on his head. They exchanged glances with our pig in disbelief for a long time. It turned out that their leader was already level 35, so the newly formed team needed to retreat immediately to avoid problems. Following them, wild boars began to grunt, led by their leader, driving them out of their territory. But the story of Frog, along with his new friend, is just beginning to develop, and very soon we will see a continuation, because there are so many more things that you could not even guess about. So, please follow to watch more content, like and write down a comment to support me. See ya in the next videos.